Okay, good. Boker Tov, everyone, again. So we continue in our introduction, we continue the discussion of the Mishnah. And today we're going to go deeper. Last time we discussed the order of the tractates within a set, within an order of Mishnah. And now we're going to look into the structure of the Mishnah itself in terms of chapters, tractates, chapters, and Mishnayot. I'll remind you the last time we said that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, before writing the Mishnah, was reluctant. He was afraid to write it down. He said it's oral law. You shouldn't write it down. And the reason is that the Torah was supposed to be fluid and dynamic and constantly changing. Not the Torah, the halacha. The Torah shebichtav, the Torah that we have, is very terse. The Torah doesn't go into great detail. It says, Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo. And we work out, some things we know, but do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. We had some details by tradition, and then we keep applying them and as we go along. So for example, one example to where the dynamism of halacha is important. If I'm already talking about basar b'halav, over the years there were thousands of books written about the problems around mixing meat and dairy. And I just heard from my son yesterday that his Rosh Yeshiva in Lakewood, Rabbi Schwartz, published a new volume of intricate discussions of Ilchot HaArovot, several chapters in the Shulchan Aruch that discuss the problems of a mixture of dairy and meat, what happens there. A lot of it has to do with the dishes, with the utensils that absorb the flavor of the meat or dairy, and then release it into the next food that is being cooked in that same utensil. But all these discussions are irrelevant today because most of our utensils do not absorb. So had we had dynamic halacha, then we would be able to put all these aside, and there's no need to learn them, and we focus on what is practical. But once you wrote it down, it becomes sacred text, and also you cannot deviate from it. So many problems accumulate on top of that problem of writing the oral text. But so now I want to, as an example to the problems within the inner structure of the Mishnah, I would like to look at Masechet Kiddushin. Literally, Kiddushin in the rabbinical Hebrew means the act of marriage. When a man offers a marriage to a woman, that's called Kiddushin. It comes from the word kadosh, that not necessarily in this context means sacred, but rather distinguished, separated. So, you are consecrated unto me, means you are separate from the rest of the world, and now you are connected to me. So the first Mishnah, I'm going to only look at the first Mishnah of the first chapter and the first Mishnah of the second chapter and present to you the question of the Talmud. The first Mishnah of the first chapter goes like that. Ha'isha niknet b'shalosh drachim. A woman is acquired in three ways. Yes, this is a problem that we cannot ignore, that the Mishnah, the rabbis of the Mishnah, view the act of marriage as an acquisition. The man acquires a woman. And we'll talk about it soon. So the woman is acquired in three ways and acquires herself in two. Acquires herself meaning she is released from that bond of marriage. She is acquired by money, by document, or by intercourse. So of those three, what is practiced today is money, not document, not intercourse. The money is the money that is exchanged under the chuppah, and so officially it's an act of acquisition. It has been replaced over the years with a ring, which is a little more romantic and a little less offending than placing a chunk of silver or a coin in the woman's head and saying, "Would you marry me? And here I'm giving you this this coin." There are still communities who do that. The Syrian community, many people in the Syrian community in New York conduct the wedding with a chunk of silver, and they say because in Hebrew, kesef is both silver and money. Now, we don't do it with a document. It's not the ketubah. The ketubah is not the marriage document. It's a secondary document, which contains conditions regarding the contract of marriage, and then intercourse. Rambam says this was the way that marriage were conducted in the past. He doesn't really support that with any proof, and most probably that was not the case. People would not have intercourse in the marketplace the way he describes it, but rather what he is right about is that in antiquity there was no ceremony for marriage. The fact that a man and a woman moved together into a house or a tent or a room in the house was shared by the community and started living together as a family, raising children, made them married in the eyes of the community. There was no consecration, there were no vows exchange or blessings or a cup of wine or anything like that. But the rabbis wanted to create this official ritual to make the marriage known to the community. So they created the ritual of kiddushin, and not only the rabbis, in many other cultures, we have that some kind of ritual around marriage. However, we continue this Mishnah. Bet Shammai Omrim, so now bechesef, right? We mentioned in the Mishnah, in the first paragraph of the Mishnah, that the woman is acquired with money. So now the Mishnah asks, how much money? Like what? How much is a woman worth? In other words, so Bet Shammai Omrim, the school of Shammai says, bedinar uveshave dinar. Dinar is a golden coin. People, just to give us a proportion, dinar, the ketubah, the whole sum of the ketubah would be 200 dinar, 200 dinars. So it's you could live on a dinar for maybe a month, if you're not a big spender. They say with a penny and the equivalent of a penny. It's really the word peruta comes from the Hebrew parat. It's really not Hebrew, Aramaic. Parat is to break down to small pieces, and still people in Israel who speak good Hebrew would call the change, the coins that you get as a change from a transaction, they call it peret. But not everybody knows this word. So this word pruta is a sort of a Hebrew word. Dinar is from the Roman dinari, that later on became dinero in Spanish, and in many countries around the world they still use the word dinar. But in any case, there's a huge difference between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. Bet Shammai, what they say dinar shave dinar, is about 100 times more than the pruta. But then the Mishnah goes on to ask, v'chama hi pruta, אחד משמונה באיסר האיטלקי. How much is pruta? It's 1/8 of the Italian isar. Isar was another type of coin. I'm not clear on why it's called isar. And 1/8 of this coin is pruta. וקונה את עצמה בגט ובמיתת הבעל. And how does she acquire herself? Either by getting a divorce or when her husband dies. Then she acquires herself. She is independent. היבמה נקנית בביאה. היבמה, a woman whose husband died without children, and now she has to marry the brother-in-law. She is acquired by intercourse, meaning there's no kiddushin. She is somehow connected to the brother-in-law, and it is consummated with the intercourse. וקונת עצמה בחליצה ובמיתת היבם, and she acquires herself by halitza, which is removing the shoe from the man's foot if he doesn't want to marry her, or if he does marry her when he dies. So to sum up, I want to sum up that and then pause for questions. So the Mishnah said this, that a woman is acquired in 3 ways. With a regular marriage, whereas Yevama, when we follow the Levirate law, a woman has to marry her brother-in-law, has two ways in which to be, one way only to be acquired by, and that's intercourse. A regular marriage, a woman can get out of marriage either by divorce or the husband's death, and the Yevama, the woman who married through the lever-in-law, could acquire herself by removing the shoe of the Yavam when he refuses to marry her, or if she marries him when he dies. It's not exactly the same, because when we talk the connection of the Yavama to the lever-in-law to the brother-in-law is different than that of marriage. But I don't want to focus on that. I just explained the Mishnah. I want to focus on the first half. So the woman is acquired in three ways, and she can acquire herself in two ways. Kesef shtar ubi'ah, with money, with document, and with intercourse. And Bet Shammai omrim, now we ask how much is money. Bet Shammai say dinar u'shve dinar, either the equivalent of a dinar or dinar itself. Bet Hillel omrim befruta u'shepruta, either a pruta or its equivalent. V'chama ye pruta echad mishmona ba'isar ha'Italki. And how much is a pruta? And then the Mishnah explains. This is one of the Mishnayot that. Okay, first, I see Daphne has a question. Yes.
I'm going back to one assumption, and I'm not saying that the definition of the word niknet means to be bought, because isn't Hashem referred to as Elkanah?
No, that's with Aleph, Elkanah.
It's different.
Hashem is referred to as Koneh Shamayim Va'aretz.
Yeah.
Koneh Shamayim Va'aretz, yes. So it's a good point. And I said I'm going to talk about it later. But maybe I'll mention this briefly. The definition of the rabbis of marriage as acquisition, when they use because in this context with rabbinical Hebrew, it does sound like acquisition, is tangential. It really has no basis in the Torah. There's a lengthy discussion in the Talmud about how the trying to prove that the concept of acquisition is in the Torah, and they say how do we prove that? Because the Torah says ki yikach ish isha, when a man takes a woman, and they say lakach, to take means to buy, because when Abraham talks to Ephron, when he wants to purchase the field of Machpelah to bury his wife, he says, Natati kesef hasadeh kach mimeni, I am giving you the money for the field, take it from me. So they say, here's the proof that lakahat means to buy. Right? I'm giving you the money, take it from me. But it's obvious that this is not the meaning of the pasuk. When I say, I give you the money, take the money from me, I'm not calling the act of acquisition taking, right? You take the money from me and you will give me the field, but the act of acquisition is not called lekiha. But the rabbis tried very hard to prove that it is. And throughout the Tanakh, the term lakah means literally to take and nothing more than that. And when it is used regarding marriage, yes, it does portray the societal norm of a man takes a woman. This is how we speak in English also. Even though we want to think about equality and they take each other and they fall in love with each other, still there is this concept. But definitely at the time of the Mishnah, this is how they speak. But we'll get later on. We'll go back to the question of acquisition. It's important. This is one of the Mishnayot that Rabbi David Zvi Hoffman, who was one of the pioneers of the scholarly approach to classical texts of Judaism, the Mishnah, the Talmud. It's one of the Mishnayot that he pointed out first as a Mishnah that is written in layers, meaning that before Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi writes down the Mishnah, when the Mishnah is still organic, still memorized and passed from generation to generation, people add layers to the Mishnah without changing it. It's an oral text that people memorize, and when they have comments on it, they add the commentary to the text without changing the original text. How do we see it in this Mishnah? The first half of the Mishnah that talks about the woman, They say that a woman is acquired in 3 ways. And what are the ways by which she is acquired? And again, whenever I say acquired, I'm just translating the text of the Mishnah. I don't think that this is the way that we should look at it. I don't think it's wrong, but I'm using just the text of the Mishnah as written. So she is acquired with money, with document, or intercourse. That's the first layer. For who knows how long, 10 years, 20, 100 years, people memorize this Mishnah in that manner. 3 ways, kesef, shtar, bia. That's it. And it went on from generation to generation. Then at a certain point, at the time of Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, who were busy, or you could say that their main work was creating a uniform halacha. They wanted to define more specifically the rules. Because if it says kesef, it doesn't tell me how much money, right? So how much money do you need in order to effectuate the marriage? So in the still organic period of the Mishnah, we would have said that whatever the future husband offers the woman, and whatever she accepts, that is what makes the you can make a standard value. One woman would be okay with 1,000 dinar, and another would want 10,000 dinar. And I think it's also obvious that when people get married, in most cases, they think about their economic financial future, and they make promises to each other. So the exchange of the ring is symbolic, or the money, and obviously it carries with it greater value that the man promises the woman. But that was okay until the time of Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. The period of Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel is the transition from the subjective halacha to that of the objective halacha. Instead of saying a woman, the kiddushin can be effectuated with money, as much money as the couple deems fit. This is what works for us. This is what we're going to do. So you could go to 10 weddings in 1 month, and each one of them would use a different amount of money. And now we move to the objective halacha, which is we have to give one value for all. So that's the first transition from that we see in the Mishnah. First layer is just general bekesef. 100 years later, Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel come and say, wait a second, how much? What do you call money? What is the definition of money? And one of them says it's dinar. The other one says it's puruta. Now, Bet Shammai, it's a lot of people tend to label Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel as mahmir and mekel, strict and lenient, but that's not exactly the case. The more accurate definition would be traditional and liberals, or innovators. So Bet Shammai are the traditionals, and they say we know that the money is a gift given to the woman and which makes her accept the marriage as a valid thing. So it has to be something of great value. It has to be a dinar. Bet Hillel say no, it's symbolic. It's just an act that effectuates the kiddushin, and it can stand for the whole for the whatever value the husband promises the wife, and therefore it could be a puruta. And eventually the halacha is like Bet Hillel. Now, that layer was added to the Mishnah, but then came another layer, and here we see clearly the historical change, because the next generation doesn't know, is not familiar with the coin puruta. It's just like Israelis who grew up in Israel after the 1980s know that there is a coin called shekel, but they never use it. They always use shekel hadash, the new shekel, right? I remember that before the shekel, there was lira, grushim, they were kind of old coins. But if someone would have told me today that the value for a certain thing is 50 lira, I would ask, how much is it in shekel, right? How much is it in shekel hadash? So that's the third layer in the Mishnah. So this little Mishnah is could give us a view of the historical development of the Mishnah. First generation says just money, whatever it is. Next generation says how much money, dinar or puta. Next generation says what is that money, and they all keep adding on and on. Now, an editor of the Mishnah, if we say that Rabbi Yehuda edited the Mishnah and wanted to give us the final text, he would have removed all that and would say, Aisha, when it says niknet bechesef, niknet bifruta, shehi echad mishmona b'isar ha'Italki. She, the value, the minimal value for kiddushin is pruta, which is 1/8 of the Italian isar, and remove all the rest of the text. But this was not done because the redactor of the Mishnah preserves the original text as was given to him, as was transmitted from generation to generation. Okay, is this Mishnah clear, or anyone has a question on that Mishnah specifically?
I don't have a question. I have something I want to ask you.
Okay.
Okay, so like when we say bekesef, like it's known as a dinar, which is like you said month. It was like a monthly thing. You could live off of like a month, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then the asir is what is it? Asir,
Yeah.
It. I know that it's kind of like a little. It's a little more than a dinar. Like it's a little extra, maybe.
No, but that's what they say Isara Italki. It's lesser. The puta could maybe puta is the smallest value that they had as a coin, and we don't know how much it would provide for you, but that was like shve puta is like the smallest coin that exists.
Okay, so hypothetically, let's just say that it was maybe more. Could one have been saying like deal with it like month to month allowance, and then another one saying deal with it as it comes, like, or give more or less, whatever the situation may be. I mean, we deal with that today, like with credit cards or whatever. Like, hey, don't overspend, don't underspend, and it's different in everyone's house. Like everyone's credit limit, their bank accounts, it's all different. So I mean, I could see that how they could work that in today if we look at it. I don't know.
No, it could be. I mean, that's what I'm saying. That you're right. That there is always a sort of financial agreement when serious adults get into the contract of marriage, they discuss between themselves how much they want to spend, how they're going to plan their future, etc. But the act of kiddushin is effectuated when the man puts money in the woman's hand. Now, I just can tell you, add to that like an interesting halachic anecdote. It happens to me all the time when I officiate at weddings, and the couple comes over and we sit and talk about all the details, and then we get to the issue of the ring, and a lot of them already did research before about the ring, and I asked them, so okay, what ring are you going to give? Did you choose the ring? And they say, oh yeah, we heard that you must have a simple ring, a smooth ring with no engravings, with no stones. So we got this. We got that ring for the ritual, for the chuppah, and then we have a separate beautiful wedding ring. Could be tens of thousands of dollars that will be for the wedding ring, the permanent one. So I said, there's something a little strange here. The ring with which you effectuated the wedding, you're going to put aside, and you're going to wear a different one. Doesn't it make more sense for you to wear that ring every day? Say, oh, yes, but that's what we were told. Halacha, websites, etc. So I tell them, okay, let me tell you why is it that the rabbi said in the past that you have to have a smooth ring only, and not, you shouldn't be studded or anything like that. The rabbi said that because there's a concern about T'nai b'kiddushim or mekach ta'ud, meaning that a woman entered the marriage on a condition, or that she misinterpreted what was happening or what was said to her, because you need her consent. So, for example, they say if she thinks that her husband is rich and he turns out to be poor, that could be a reason to call off the wedding. Of course, they don't do it that easily, but if you press it, it could become a reason to call off the wedding. I mean, retroactively, like they were never married because she didn't agree to marry a poor guy. Could be also the opposite. If he's a rich guy and she thought he's poor, and then she finds out that he's rich, she says, "No, I didn't want a wealthy guy. Why? Oh, it attracts attention. He's constantly going to be busy with his money. I want the poor guy live simply." That could be again an excuse to undo the wedding. Now, with the ring, the rabbi said it will be the same problem. If she doesn't know the exact value of the ring, then she might think, let's say, that the ring is $1,000, but it's only $10, right? And she said, yes, I will marry that guy because she thinks that he's giving her $1,000 ring. Then she finds out that it was a $10 ring, and she wants to kick him out. So we don't want that to happen. It could happen. The reverse could also happen. She thinks it's a very cheap ring, and she's okay with that. That's what she doesn't want to spend much. Believe it. I mean, I know it sounds strange, but I did weddings like that, where the woman told me before the wedding, she says, I don't know what to do because my husband wanted me to spend on this and this and that, and I don't want to do that. I said, okay, tell him to set up for you a charity fund, and you give it to whatever you want. Take care of the needy. But because she grew up with very tight conditions, and she didn't feel comfortable to have someone who spends so much, like not thinking about tomorrow. So it does happen. So the rabbis wanted to prevent a situation where she thinks he's a big spender, and then she found he's a cheapskate, or vice versa, right? And therefore they said only a smooth ring, because with a smooth ring, the woman would more or less know the value of the ring. The margin of error is not so great. But once you add engravings or study, it's studded with stones, whatever, the range, the margin of error could be much greater. So, okay, that is accepted. So now, after I explained this to the couple, I asked them, tell me this, when you went to look for the ring, did you look for the ring together? Or did you surprise her with the ring? And the answer is usually, the surprise is for the engagement ring. When he asks for her hand, that's where he goes and buys the ring without telling her. But the wedding ring is usually, not only she knows what ring they're buying and how much it's worth, she tells him usually what is it that she wants, right? So it says, in other words, she comes into that wedding knowing exactly the value of that ring to the penny. So this whole concern about she would have thought that this ring, right, is worth more or less doesn't apply. Just tell her how much the ring is worth. That's it. So the reason that modern rabbis wouldn't tell it to the couple, because they said, okay, that is a solution that could have been done in the past as well, right? The rabbis could have told the woman, don't use that ring. Go ask. Okay, it's a good argument, but unfortunately, in the past, I think the rabbis didn't trust the ability of the woman that much, and it's a shame. And the other thing is the culture has changed. Maybe in the past it wasn't appropriate to ask or to know how much it's worth. Now it's different. But anyway, this is what happens now. So now I want to go to, yes, Daphna.
I have like a different perspective slightly on the amounts.
Okay.
So it's very nice to think that the amount of money is symbolic, but when you're looking at like a brass tacks of a relationship, the time when a woman is really dependent on a man is at the end of a pregnancy, because then you have like a month where literally you cannot do anything, or not easily.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like in some ways Shammai may be setting this up like, okay, let's look at the worst case scenario, right? What's the minimum amount that anybody could scrape together if they had to? And what's the minimum amount that someone could rely on if they had to? I mean, I know it's a very negative maybe perspective, but it might, I don't know. It's just a thought.
No, it's a good thought. I said that that's hard. It's obviously when Shammai and Hillel say what they say, they are creating new rules. Before that, like I said, it was subjective. Every couple went into it and they did whatever they wanted. We don't know what was the range. It could be that Shammai is referring to the average range of wedding that the Bet Shammai were familiar with, whereas Bet Hillel goes for the lowest denomination of a coin, because they say as a standard rule, this is the minimum that we need. Why it doesn't emerge as a range? Because it could be because of what you're saying, and we know also from other sources in the Gemara that yearly contracts were very rare in the time of the Talmud. Nobody had the security to offer a year-round contract. Usually, it was a sechir yom or sechir chodesh, like either for a day or for a month. So that's very probable that it's about dependency and how what kind of guarantee the husband could give a woman, and also that works with the understanding of evolutionary biologists of the relationship between the male and the female of the human species, and in many other species as well, where the woman looks for someone that she knows could provide for her and for her descendants. So yes, it's very very true, he said. So let's go now to the second chapter. So this is the first chapter of Kiddushin, and we only looked at the first Mishnah that goes into detail about on the acquisition of a woman through marriage. Now we go to chapter 2. Chapter 2 starts with these words: Ha'ish mekadesh bo uvishluho. A man can betroth a woman through himself or through his agent. A woman may be betrothed through herself or through her agent or through her father, and so on. And then they talk about different types of kiddushin. If a man says to a woman, "Be betrothed to me with this cup of wine," and it turns out it's honey, or vice versa. And then if he says, "I'm a Kohen, but he's a Levi," so all these are about the ways by which a man can betroth a woman. But note that the first chapter started with the words a woman is acquired, right? And the second chapter started with the word ha'ish mekadesh, a man betroths a woman. So the Talmud Bavli, on the spot, in Masechet Kiddushin, we're going to go there, raises the question, and this is something that when I was in yeshiva, we spent a lot of time on that question. Here's the question: Ha'isha niknet, ma'ishna hacha detane ha'isha niknet, u'ma'ishna hatam detane ha'ish mekadesh. The Mishnah teaches that a woman can be acquired in three ways. The Gemara asks, what is different? Meaning, why here the Mishnah says a woman is acquired using the language of acquisition, and there in the next chapter it teaches a man betroths a woman using the language of betrothal. Right? So the Mishnah the Gemara asks for unification of the text, meaning the Mishnah, the Talmud assumes that there is an editor. This is one of the things that an editor would do with a book. You make sure that you reference to the same object or person or action in the same manner, that the spelling is uniform. Right? One of the things that tells me that a text was not edited correctly is when I see that something was spelled once with the K, once with the C. Talking about names, for example, right? Or there's discrepancy. So the Talmud assumes that the Mishnah was edited thoroughly, but we already saw by when we looked at the three layers in the first Mishnah the acquisition is made by money. How much money? What is that money? That there are layers. They were added. So there's no clear editing. In any case, the Gemara raises the question. The Gemara would have wanted to see the Mishnah phrase like that. The first chapter starts with Ha'isha niknet, a woman is acquired. And the second chapter starts Ha'ish koneh, the man acquires. Or the first chapter says Ha'isha mitkadeshet, a woman is betrothed. And the second chapter says Ha'ish mekadesh, man betrothed. But why do we use different verbs for both chapters? So the Gemara answers like that. Mishum de kabar lemitnei kesef, because in the first chapter it's going to speak about money. V'kesef minalan, and how do we know that money works in kiddushin? Gamar ki hakiham is the Ephron. We learned from the field of Ephron, like I mentioned before. And then they say, and taking is called acquisition, and then there's another pasuk. So they said, but okay, you could start over there with the language of the man acquires. I'm not going to go into that. There's a lengthy discussion in the Talmud on that, and it makes little sense, really little sense. I remember that I was, sort of bothered by that when I was in yeshiva, trying to figure out what is it that we're dealing with here with the language, and then after that, the Talmud goes on to ask, why is it written in the Mishnah Ha'isha niknet b'shalosh drachim, shalosh in shalosh 3 drachim ways, and shalosh is in the masculine, because in Hebrew the counter of objects hat shnayim shalosh has a gender. So when you count feminine objects, you say ahat shtayim shalosh. When you count masculine objects, you say had shnayim shlosha. So the Talmud says, why does the Mishnah says here shalosh drachim in the masculine, in the feminine, calling derech path, using the feminine gender, where in other places, for another Mishnayot, it uses the masculine, and there's a long discussion on that as well. So this is something, again, that has surfaced in recent generations, but actually existed for a very long period, and that is a comment by the early scholars of the Gemara of Sepharad, mainly Ramban, Rif, and others, who said that the first pages in Masechet Kiddushin, the first pages of the Talmud in Kiddushin, but also in other tractates, were actually not an analysis of the text of the Mishnah, but rather a way to engage the people. Or in other words, it's sort of like light entertainment for the listeners, because those were masechtot, those were tractates that were taught publicly twice a year in what is called Yarchei Kala, during the month of Tishrei and the month of Nisan. People would gather to study from the rabbis, and most of them were not very knowledgeable in halacha. So instead of discussing intricate halacha with them, the rabbis would come with word plays. Same with brachot. They ask, is Uva Hashemesh, the sun comes, does it mean evening or morning? In Masechet Psahim, they say, how do we know that you search for the Hametz with the candle? This pasuk, that pasuk. All these things are trivial. They're not part of the tractate. They were put there to, like, drasha. I mean, of course, for us today, that wouldn't make sense. But for the people back then, that's what the rabbis thought would entertain them as a beginner, at beginner's level of Talmud. But over the thousands of years, that has been forgotten. It became part of the Talmud, and there are tons of books written just on these pages, which is a shame. One of my masters, my teachers in Bar Ilan, Professor Meir Simcha Feldblum, led the scholarship on that, together with Professor Avram Weiss, David Weiss Alivni, and others. And one of his students, Pinchas Hyman, put together a source book of all the quotes from the Rishonim, from the early sages, who say this is not part of the Talmud. This is an addition. Don't bother with it. And sure enough, after he launched this project, originally got it was endorsed by some rabbis, but then other rabbis came, to defend the Talmud and say, who are we going to believe? A professor in Bar Ilan who decided that this text is not part of the Gemara, or our traditional way of learning that we have been keeping for thousands of years, right? And so logic is tossed aside, and you stick with this is how we did it, this is how we do it now, and that's it. I'm not going to share again with you a video because some of you have seen it already, but Shai sent me a video of a Hasidic master playing the violin during Hanukkah candle lighting, and it's just horrific. It's it's lucky that he's not sitting on a roof, because if people were there, I would jump over the roof, hearing that music, right? But why is this guy, this rabbi, playing that horrible music while lighting the candles? Because his grandfather used to do that also. The only problem is that his grandfather was a violinist. He knew how to play the violin, but the grandson doesn't. But all the grandchildren of that rabbi from, I think, of Kuznets, they all do that. And there's not. This music is really suicidal. I don't know what other word to use. And that is exactly this. It's everything to an extreme. But this is what happens when you say, this is how we did it, this is how we're going to do it. You don't apply logic, you don't apply common sense. Okay. So now let's really go back to the question of the Gemara here. So this is the question that opens the question is valid. The answer is not valid. The question of the Gemara is, why do you use the term acquisition in chapter 1 and the term betrothal in chapter 2? So for that, let us go back to chapter 1. And now I will read not the whole chapter, but just the beginning of each Mishnah of that chapter. And then also we'll answer Daphna's question about is it really acquisition that we're talking about here? So we're going back. Here is the first chapter of Tractate Kiddushin that starts with the words, a woman is acquired, right? So let's read just the beginning of each Mishnah. Mishnah 1. A woman is acquired in 3 ways and acquires herself in 2. Mishnah 2. A Hebrew slave is acquired by money and by document, and acquire himself by this and that. A Hebrew maidservant acquires herself by this also. Then Mishnah 3. A Canaanite slave is acquired by money, deed, or possession. Mishnah 4. Large animals are acquired by being handed over, and small animals by lifting. Mishnah 5. Property which has security, meaning real estate, is acquired by money, by deed or possession. And property which does not have security, meaning any other object, is acquired only by being drawn by the purchaser. Then in Mishnah 6, whatever can be used as payment for another object, as soon as this one takes possession of the object, the other one assumes liability for what is given in exchange. That basically is a description of barter. I give you one object, you give me something in return. So the Mishnah says that you don't have to actually exchange physically both objects, but one side acquires his object, and automatically the other object becomes the possession of the other side. So let's say if Adam and I, for example, I want to exchange my let's say my computer for Adam's glasses, right? So once I take hold of Adam's glasses, my computer automatically becomes his. It doesn't have to touch it. Wherever it is, it becomes his. So that's the barter. Okay. Now Mishnah 7 speaks about the mitzvot that the son must is obligated towards the father, and then who is obligated, men or women? Other in Mishnah 8 rights, korbanot, that applied with men or women, and it ends with this: Kol ha'oseh mitzvah achat, he who performs one commandment is rewarded; his days are prolonged; he inherits the land, etc. So now, what is the when we look for logic in that Mishnah? right? Because we want to, at least in the chapter, to find logic. So what do we have? First of all, we have two units in that parak, right? The first unit speaks about what? What is the theme of the first unit? In one word.
Marriage.
No, it's not marriage. The first unit, there are several.
Acquisition. Yeah,
acquisition.
The whole series, acquisition.
It's right. It's a chapter about acquisitions, and it goes in descending order of the importance of the acquired object, right? So first is a woman. She's independent and she has to say yes. Second is a Hebrew slave and a Hebrew maidservant. Then a Canaanite slave. Then an animal. So see how offensive it is for a woman that she's the first in line that ends up with no purchasing animals, right? We talk about purchasing humans, purchasing animals, large animals, small animals, then real estate and other objects, and then barter. That's the first unit of the Perek.
That doesn't completely make sense, though, because if I just can try to make me a problem maker,
no, it's okay.
Real estate, this is a sad thing, but from my limited understanding of the past, real estate would have had more value than some of the things above it on the list.
Right.
And yet it's down there on the list.
So it's down there, right? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like it's not a clear ranking. It's not just most valuable to least valuable, financially anyway.
Oh yeah. You're right. It's not about financial value, but rather it's about I would say about the engagement of the other side in the purchase. So a woman is independent and you need her consent for the marriage. She cannot be married against her will. A Hebrew slave is usually either sells himself as a slave or is sold by the Bedin. So there's more involvement of deciding parties. A Canaanite slave has no say in the acquisition. Obviously, animals are living creatures, but they can't communicate with us, or we don't ask them if they want to be acquired or not. And then we speak about objects. So when we get to objects, the real estate is the top of the list in inanimate objects.
So it's about agency, maybe? Not really.
Yeah, agency. Yeah, agency is part of it, right? You could say that it's acquisition and agency. And then the second part does talk about men and